for all of you who are parents, this is a wonderful, wonderful module to be teaching your children because
Mhm.
our kids need to be learning how to deal with tricky people actually as well. So, okay, so let's kind of go over some of the data in terms of that first stat, Brent. From University of
Yeah.
California. What was your thought on that? 80% of employees will lose work over time by dealing with TPs. That
Sorry,
was
is
at
that
the beginning. That was at the very beginning before even the Q&A. I forgot that stat. That's a very high stat.
sorry, could you repeat that? I don't have that right in front of me.
It's on the top of the page, the top of the
Okay.
page, and it's second
Lose
last.
work time.
Yeah,
Well,
lose
I
work
think
time.
that's realistic, yeah.
So University of Southern California found 80% of employees will lose work time over dealing with TPs. And
I mean,
then,
that was
yeah,
the percentage of people that have a tricky colleague, right? If you jump down
correct.
to our third quiz question. So
Yes.
I think that it almost goes hand in hand. I think that it's going
Yeah,
to end up being a time waster. Anytime you have to deal with a tricky
right.
person, instead of it being a smooth interaction, the way you might just hope things naturally happen, it's
Mm.
probably not going to be that way. So the time waster is almost guaranteed, I think.
What was your thought about the first stat? 13% of people quit their job. Um,
So
what was your thought?
clarification, I'm pretty sure that stat is sort of an exit survey of some sort of people who did quit their job. Why did you quit? It might have been because of another person that they wanted to avoid. So, but that's still super significant. 1 in 8 people who quit,
Yeah,
if we interpret it that way,
right.
quit because of someone that they had to work with that they could just no longer deal with anymore. And that was the main reason.
Well, and the thing that I was thinking about actually is I actually would think the number is actually higher now. Like since,
Mhm.
we were talking about this yesterday in the accelerated team course that with the great resignation that has actually happened since COVID, I find people are rethinking their life. People don't want to tolerate it anymore. There's a lot of the amount of conversations I have with a lot of our SI members around, how they're making decisions and whether or not they're going to stay in a company or not. It's like the well-being that what people are now valuing, I think, their well-being and their wellness a lot more than they did before. And so it's like and because this is such a drainer and it's exhausting, a lot of people are like, I just don't want to deal with it. Like I want to
All right,
I
counterpoint. What about
yeah,
work from home? I think working from home
right.
gives someone a bit of a
Yes.
release access there to say,
Yeah.
okay, I don't have to work side by side with these people
Right.
anymore. Now I might actually stick with this job.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yesterday, for those of you, some of you, I'm recognizing some of the names, but for most of you, you wouldn't know that yesterday we were just wrapping up a 4-week course. It was a 4-week course called Accelerated Team Builder, and the module that we were talking about yesterday was around remote. Basically, how do you actually engage a remote team?
Mhm.
And so we were just talking about that, and pros and cons kind of around that. But you're absolutely right, Brent. I think that's a really interesting point. So if somebody's part of a team and their coworker is really tricky, then working from home is probably like a really great boundary,
Mhm.
like all of a sudden versus having to kind of bump into them in the lunchroom, bumping them, with like so it's an interesting point. It's actually an interesting point around that. 90% of top performers are skilled at managing their emotions.
So I think some people read this question and thought, oh, this is another question where we're sort of bemoaning the fact that not enough people have
Mm,
have top
right. Yeah.
are good at managing their emotions. The point of this question, perhaps we could have written it a bit better, is that there's a high correlation between being a top performer and
Right.
and being able to manage emotions, having that EQ. So that's the point of that question.
Hmm. Right. And this kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the research that we have read, based on people who have very high leadership skills, specifically emotional intelligence skills. They basically say it's about 80 to 90% of it actually really predicts a person's success in both their work and actually their home life. So
Mhm.
I think that is really, really important. When you've got a tricky person, you've got to get on the phone with them as fast as possible and get off of email, because email and texting, there's no body language, and a lot of our communication, I mean, the stats are vary and it's a bit, people will have different numbers around it, but it's around like in the 90% of our communication is actually nonverbal. So we
Yeah.
can misread a lot of communication. So, and then we're confusing, exactly as you said, confusing emails. So if you have a tricky situation, my recommendation, I didn't talk about this, is get off of technology and get on a phone with a person, and ideally actually even FaceTime. I don't think they
Mm.
become necessarily easier because they're not going to change. Okay. The TP generally is not going to change. Okay. I think we just have to get our head around that. TPs generally, they don't change, but we can change. Okay. We can change, and therefore our response to them can change, and how much it really impacts us, we can change that. All right.
Yeah.
And so this is where the power is. This is a superpower on this.
So tricky
Hmm.
people is a nice way to think about them, I think.
Yes. We call them a TP, not toilet paper, tricky person. All right, and it's just kind of it's a bit of it's a little bit of a flag when we've got a TP that we're dealing with within our company. It's like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. So it's almost like you have to kind of put your armor on a little bit more, and just it's like you're double downing on all of your best possible leadership management skills. You've got to be
Yeah.
like super ready for dealing with it. So